So this is part A of the Coup d'Ilar campaign. The edition continuing as part of the Justice for Baby Angel Geronimo campaign. Geronimo is the world's most well-known and loved alpaca. He is the symbol. Geronimo is the symbol and the identity of all universal justice campaigns being fought against injustice in every corner of the every known corner of the planet Earth. Geronimo is, of course, physically only based in England, in a place called Gloucestershire, South Gloucestershire. And his mom, Helen, whose picture with him can be seen on the right of this screen. So our campaign for justice for baby angel Geronimo has been based on, and will continue to be based on, the fact that Little England has become occupied by forces of evil. As understood, you look up and you see the definition of evil. It doesn't matter what religion or what status in terms of religious faith you have. Evil has overtaken the public known spheres of England. And we say Little England because Little England is an attitude that is created by evil, denial of the truth. And this Scottish-born criminal spewing, the Scottish-born criminal, complete disgrace, Trevor Kavanagh, who is employed by Rupert Dirty Digger Murdoch, put this headline here, and the theme he is actually pursuing in the piece underneath that headline in the scum of yesterday, Monday, the 6th of September 2021. Now, this criminal is so shameless. He is pushing the idea that the congenital liar Boris Johnson synonymized is the identification of great British values. The only values that Boris Johnson has ever kind of known and served and craved are the values to enhance his greed. He is on the record as saying, greed is good. It's like saying evil is good. Only evil can praise evil. Now, Johnson, of course, is daily supported by the scum. And the criminals getting the platforms and the scum, like the criminal Trevor Terrible Kavanagh, they are the ones who are responsible for the darkness. And darkness is the absence of enlightenment, of light. Darkness is injustice, full stop. And to inflict injustice on the innocent, the evil, congenital liar, evil flaunting, congenital liar, Boris Johnson has been receiving collusion and complicity from the likes of this evil, terrible Kavanagh. And this terrible Kavanagh, the evil one, is actually engaged in the propaganda, the evil propaganda for the evil-doing, congenital liar Johnson, so that Johnson gets more votes or gets votes, enough votes at the next election, whenever that is. It's not just Boris, it's great British Boris. What is great British? It's absolute contradiction of the Little England's or Little Englanders' view of the world, because the Little Englanders don't accept that the world exists. They are evil and they don't accept justice. They are evil and they don't accept compassion. They're evil and they don't accept the idea of respecting the independence, the freedom, life of the innocent. And the likes of the Fleet Street criminals have been aiding and abetting the evildoers that are now in post and positions. And they've been doing it for longer than the 20 years since the evil George W. Bush and the evil Tony Blair inflicted the criminality under the slogan that they were fighting Islamist terrorists. Islamist terrorists never existed. Islamist terrorists were invented by the imperialist crusader evil-doing liars. We have no connection with Afghanistan. We have no connection with the Taliban or any of the people that have been imprisoned in the Guantanamo Bay or any other part of the world. What we are connected with, and we shall remain connected with, and we have been connected with, is the quest for justice against all evil-doing regimes and all evil-doing incumbents in the name of the people that they have been subjecting to evil and the other victims of their evil. Most certainly symbolized by the baby angel Geronimo. There is not enough words that can be deployed to condemn the denial of baby angel Geronimo's innocence by the criminals in Downing Street, at number 10 Downing Street, in the various departments of the UK government, including the crook Robert Buckland. The crook Buckland is allegedly responsible for the Ministry of absolute injustice. And the crook has been completely silent. The crook Buckland has been absolutely silent while series of criminals sitting as judges have been meting out criminality and denial and evil on orders coming from the various ministries, so-called, and of course being fronted by the evil cabal at number 10 Downing Street. As far as we know, there is no public or so-called social media outlet or platform that has been even tokenistically, even notionally recognizing the duties under the rule of law, duties under the due process, duties under the Magna Carta, that each of the evil regimes, departments has been under and has been flouting, violating, breaking. Not only breaking and violating in words, but physically, violently attacking the innocent. And all of these behavior constitutes evidence, undeniable, universally recognizable, universally verifiable evidence that the criminals doing the violations and the violence are wantonly doing this in the knowledge that Fleet Street, also known as the so-called Fourth Estate, Fleet Street won't notice. And if it noticed, it won't make any comment. And if it did make any comment, it would only aggravate the criminality and the corruption by aiding and abetting Johnson and his co-congenital liars in his corrupt criminal cabinet. Wrongdoers. For example, Dominic Raab. Where do you begin? Dominic Raab, and it is for those who actually defer to the likes of the Wikipedia. Wikipedia, of course, is the lying Bryce who has come from America and settled in England. And this criminal Bryce, I mean, he like other criminals like Kavanagh, he cannot find enough kind of excuses to praise the evildoers in England. So Bryce has actually reduced the kind of traction, the credibility, and the criteria that at the beginning of Wikipedia had been much different from what they are now. They're not. The Wikipedia has now become completely unreliable and untrustworthy. But in terms of the format, in terms of accessing information through the internet, Wikipedia is the only route that you can kind of test some of the frameworks, and you have to do additional research and additional ethical analysis in order to establish the actual kind of state of a particular position that they're promoting and advocating. So, for example, the entry on Boris Johnson is completely devoid of any reference to most of the information about him that are actually otherwise available, not through the Google or the Wikipedia. For instance, the comment made by, as we have been saying on the evidence, factually, comment made to Boris Johnson's face by Eddie Mair, who used to be employed by the BBC. He was standing in about 7 years ago, standing in while Andrew Marr of the Marr show or program was taking a break or was away. And this particular Sunday that Eddie Mair stood in for Andrew Marr, one of the guests included Boris Johnson, and that was Boris Johnson, still incumbent as the so-called mayor at the expense of London. And after a while talking, Eddie Mair said to Boris Johnson, "You are a nasty piece of work, aren't you?" Now that was on as far as I can work out, live television. Whether that makes any difference apart from editorial control afterwards is another matter. But this is what the transcript, I think, or the reference reads like. Remember, we're talking about Boris Johnson aiding and abetting the conspiracy against baby angel Geronimo. And we are continuing to talk about the role played by the three judges in the same way that the Nazis had their judges behave. After Hitler kind of changed the Nazi German constitution and totally stopped any telling of the truth by the judiciary and converted the judiciary and the judges in Nazi Germany to being stooges, rubber stamps of the Nazi agenda and narrative. The behavior of the judges, Murray, Griffiths, and Stacey, has been absolutely identical to those Nazi judges. And it makes these three even worse because they have not been behaving as rubber stamp as a result of any expressly corrupt legislation that removes even the slightest trace of independence from the conduct of the judges. So when Paul Mason talks about fascism in Britain, he is actually referring to these kinds of behavior by the judges against the innocent. Innocent baby angel Geronimo, innocent Helen MacDonald. And there is nothing but innocence all the way back to New Zealand, where the baby angel Geronimo was originally born and was tested more than once and found to be absolutely perfectly healthy, as he has been. Now, this is the bit in the Financial Times that Chris Cook, now the Financial Times senior editor, wrote. This is the headline: UK officials are going to great lengths to keep their secret secret. Now, if anyone in the last 4 years has found that to be the case, that UK officials are going to great lengths to keep official secret secret. Keep their secret secret. It is Alan MacDonald. It's not a member of the licensed kind of law trade, a barrister, call them a QC or a barrister, or a member of the profession, so-called, that has been licensed by the Law Society, the Solicitors Regulation Authority. Why? Because nobody has come out. None of these people has actually come out with such impeccable evidence that Helen MacDonald has come across in the last 4 years in her battle to protect the baby angel Geronimo and to protect her own integrity and her ethical and moral interests and rights. And she has found over the last 4 years of the battle that officials are indeed going to great lengths to keep their secrets secret. And the length the officials are going to keep their secret secret will take at least a month to elaborate on and detail and to kind of describe. And what they have been doing, these officials, also known as civil servants, have been allowed to do what they've been doing. In fact, they have been encouraged to do what they've been doing. And so what Chris Cook says in the Financial Times, that he posted online on the 30th of August, and the Financial Times online, of course, carried the piece dated the 31st of August. And what Chris Cook says in that piece is that not only are government employees, that these so-called officials, breaking the law, openly breaking and violating the domestic UK legislation, Freedom of Information Act, but they are being encouraged to do that by the government. And by government, Chris Cook actually means what he says in that part of his piece, ministers. So ministers, who are the ministers? Who are the ministers in terms of, in the context of constitutional law and in the context of the UK government departments and government ministers, openly breaking international law, domestic law as routine. It's not like a one-off issue about a one-off kind of foray into breaking international law by the likes of Johnson, which caused Theresa May to intervene at one time, or the actual attempt at that stage to stop the UK's international kind of amount of aid to poorer countries, when the likes of Andrew Mitchell, an MP and former International Development Secretary post holder, and Theresa May and other people spoke against the plot to withdraw money from some of the poorest countries in the world. And that is not something that is allowed. That is not allowed under the agreements called, which gives the option to derogate. That is to say, not to obey the requirements of an agreement or international treaty agreement. Because derogation essentially is only allowed when there is genuine national security problem or issue which warrants the application of the derogation, that is the exemption. But attacking an innocent as a liar and defaming them as a liar, like Helen MacDonald has been, is not covered by the option allowed in terms of the international agreements that the UK remains actively, at least on paper, actively signed up to. And no domestic act of parliament allows for such derogation. Derogation, remember, has to be based on national security or a threat of something like a terrorism. The only terrorism sponsored by the UK government against the innocent pair, baby angel Geronimo and his mom, Helen, both of them have been subjected to terrifying, terrorizing attacks. And no common law exists. And we shall go to that when we go back 800 years and refer again to the Magna Carta of 1225, that version. No domestic law, domestic act of parliament. The most of the kind of acts of parliament in the last, let's say, 40 years have been reluctantly, but on the facts, recognition of the international kind of atmosphere, environment of a regime or a country or a state coming out of darkness. When we say Little England is in the evil grip of evil darkness, we are not doing that because there is no other phrase available. Anyone watching this program or watching these editions will know that we are absolutely consistent about the highest standards of morality, highest standards of ethics, highest standards of accountability that we advocate, and we have advocated ever, always. And when we look at the evidence that has been only recently made public to our knowledge in the last 6 weeks, when we look at the evidence of the behavior of Boris Johnson and his congenitally lying cabal, claiming to be the government of the UK, we find evidence of the darkest of the dark behavior that can be found in any annal, any history, any account, any chronicle of civilized state. You do not go to Afghanistan and murder any number of people under the pretext that you are liberating them from their darkness and dark culture, and then assume that your murderous plot against Geronimo is somehow morally, ethically, even remotely countenanced by any supporter, any backer, any defender of innocence, universal innocence. This is not a territory that you enter unless you are in the dark age and dark mode, an evil mode, which is what Boris Johnson is a personification of, embodiment of. So was it Boris Johnson who gave the order to absolutely kind of confirm that innocent Geronimo must not be treated as innocent? Even the as they say, the detailed condemnation of the random murders around against baby angel Geronimo, even the condemnation published by the scum and byline to Stanley P. Johnson. Stanley P. Johnson is not some kind of stranger that nobody knows about. From all public accounts, Stanley Johnson is the biological father of Boris Johnson. So when Stanley Johnson agreed to his name being used in that piece that was published in the scum, Stanley Johnson, must have thought for significant amounts of time before he condemned the plot against baby angel Geronimo in the way that he did. So Stanley Johnson is not only a kind of enemy. He's not only not an enemy of Boris Johnson personally or Boris Johnson in terms of career. Stanley Johnson has often either promoted Boris Johnson or has defended him. And he didn't promote and he didn't defend Boris Johnson when he came across the evidence of Boris Johnson's complicity in the crime of plotting the severest harm against the most innocent being on the face of the earth, baby angel Geronimo. Now, all claimants among the 8 billion or so, I say 8 billion because the various statistics collected from various parts of the world always are incomplete. So there is a margin of error that I complete by saying the 8 billion people. It could be even more than 8 billion people. 8 billion people, all of them, all 8 billion of them have been ignored by Boris Johnson. All the 8 billion would oppose. Overwhelming majority of the 8 billion people on the planet of Earth would oppose if a measurable poll or survey or count of them were possible and published on the question of the innocent baby angel Geronimo being targeted by the evil forces in control of the positions of power in Darkland. Darkland is Little England. Boris Johnson has never ever gone on the record as supporting justice. In fact, all the known, published, traceable, accessible episodes of Boris Johnson in the context of justice of the innocent, for the innocent, show Boris Johnson being on the side of the violence against the innocent, injustice against the innocents. And as he has done against Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, he even aggravated, made her position even worse by giving the Iranian regime a pretext too far. I mean, they didn't need the pretext. They didn't ask for a pretext. At that stage, Iranian regime was already persecuting Nazanin without any provocation or a pretext being added to their table, if you like, because they got Nazanin in their grip, not because she is a criminal or she did any crime against the Iranian state or against humanity or against anybody. They just found her there and they were kind of waiting for a pretext of their own, whatever the pretext, and they grabbed hold of her and they put her in jail. They put her and they put her through the bogus prosecution. It's a charade. All of that part of the Iranian state's operations. And Johnson, when in post as Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab's position at the time, was asked about Nazanin being held in captivity by the Iranians. And Johnson showed his total disregard for evidence, for innocence, and he said something that the Iranians immediately grabbed hold of and displayed on their propaganda networks and said that even the UK Foreign Secretary was admitting that Nazanin was a spy, which she wasn't. How was she a spy? In any case, our campaign doesn't recognize the speciality of spying. We shall elaborate on why that is the case, because spying is not an exclusive way of doing damage to your so-called enemy diplomatically. In any case, we're talking about the unfitness for purpose on the part of Boris Johnson, as Dominic Cummings described him as being. He is unfit for purpose. And Cummings has said, not somebody else, Cummings has said in the last few weeks that he, Cummings, actually considered moving, whatever that entailed, moving to get rid of Boris Johnson as leader of the Conservatives, or leader of the Conservative Party. And that, he said, Cummings said, was because of the evidence, overwhelming evidence, that Boris Johnson was unfit for purpose. Then, of course, Dominic Cummings has published a whole list of things that constitute evidence in the narrative that he's presenting, amounting to the fact that Boris Johnson is not fit for purpose, dysfunctional. Now, no court of law, actually following the evidence and testing the evidence objectively, could ignore the mountain of evidence that exists against Boris Johnson. Being a congenital liar, being unfit for purpose, being cruel, as his statement saying they let thousands of bodies pile up in the country. No objectively active, independently active court of law could ignore, overlook all the evidence in the context of being asked to truthfully, honestly, and justly adjudicate on the right of the regime to allow that criminal plot against baby angel Geronimo to stay in place whatsoever. Anyone who accesses or can access the various social media sites of the current United Nations organization and its various agencies, executive agencies, no one can deny the fact that they are all, every day, all of them are putting on the record their opposition to cruelty, to violation generally, and cruelty against the vulnerable in particular, injustice against the vulnerable in particular, in any part of the world, in any kind of dominion, in any kind of territory, zone, jurisdiction. They're saying that. So where does the criminal crook Robert Buckland think these three criminal offenders, Murray, Griffiths, and Stacy found any justification for their criminal assertions, wrongdoing assertions, evil assertion, cruel assertions, rubber stamping, as they so asserted, the criminal plot against baby angel Geronimo, and the criminally aggravated acts of defamation against Helen, Geronimo's mom. Where had Buckland been for the entire period of his incumbence in that corrupt, wrongdoing post of Secretary of State at the expense of the concept of justice and fairness and rule of law and due process? Where has he been? When the so-called anti-Brexit campaigner and member of the House of Peers, David Penick, was hired by the Manchester City Football Club, not the Manchester United, but Manchester City, in a case that they wanted David Penick to represent them. Penick charged them at the rate of £20,000 for his day, and the day is not 24 hours of the day. The day is only at the most 7 hours of the day. £20,000 a day. Now think about that. What was he producing? What outcome was he producing? There was no evidence in the reports that we have seen that he had to produce any outcome. Now that is a kind of contract between Penick and the Manchester City Football Club. It's not based on any criteria whatsoever. And Penick didn't have to do justice. So, for example, when the crooks in Fleet Street refer to Helen MacDonald raising funds, they criminally, kind of dishonestly and jealously and offensively suggested that she was almost trying to make money. Nothing could be further from the truth. The fact that she was even having to raise funds by legitimate means at this stage did not reflect on her. It reflected on the crooks in Fleet Street completely failing to understand or failing to recognize that Helen MacDonald was put in that position of even to have to go to court for justice for baby angel Geronimo, by the criminals in post-DEFRA and the criminal regime fronted by the criminal congenital liar Boris Johnson. What kind of value is that? What kind of culture is that? Where such criminality is allowed. What is the difference between Boris Johnson fronted cabal and the Taliban regime? What's the difference? I have said this right from the beginning. Immediately after news became available that the Taliban were advancing and the British and the American forces were absolutely desperately trying to escape, there is no case, there is not one case that can be accessed, found anywhere in any language, any media, that is remotely comparable to the campaign, the violent, vicious criminality of DEFRA aimed against Helen MacDonald and against baby Angel Geronimo for the last 4 years. And here the Times, the Murdoch Criminality Times, put on the front page a piece based on the crook Robert Jenrick preaching British values and culture to the collected migrants from Afghanistan. Now, these are people whose definition of being migrants is, of course, qualified by the fact that they have been allowed the status to migrate to the UK because of their role as helpers, supporters of the British occupation of Afghanistan. They are not the migrants that are condemned to die while trying to cross the sea ordinarily. So anyone watching this must understand what this program is about. This is about very detailed, completely fact-based diagnosis and rejection of the criminality by UK government department DEFRA against the innocent baby Geronimo and his mom, Helen MacDonald. So what we are saying in all these evidence, everything is accessible. You can verify every single assertion, factual assertion that I'm making and have been making. You have to recognize also that this is the only program which is doing this. There is no program, no other program, no television program. This one is broadcast only on the internet, but it is a television program. We don't broadcast on the terrestrial or on the satellite or on the cable networks. We do this only on the internet because that is the easiest accessible one that we can actually technically, logistically connect with and administer. But despite the fact that there is no terrestrial access, doesn't make a content any different. Secondly, you will not find any of these factual references or diagnosis anywhere else because nobody else will do that. Nobody else will do what we are doing. Why? Because we come from a long tradition of campaigning for justice. And we are ongoing with all the other campaigns that we have been doing. And this is absolutely, totally, impeccably based on evidence, on truth and objectivity, neutrality. And we are informed. As we do that, we are informed by evidence and fact and the truth, and nothing but the fact and the truth and the evidence. So what we are doing is highlighting something that no university, Department of Law or no university media section will do. None of the British mainstream so-called broadcasting outlets, including the BBC, Sky News, ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, none of them is doing what we are doing. If anyone can factually find anything that does exist as against what I'm saying that it doesn't exist on any of those platforms or from any of those broadcasters. You can send a direct message containing just the reference. No discussion is needed. If there is a program, either video, audio, or if there is a documentary in text only, we want to know what that is. Because this campaign for justice for Geronimo, baby angel Geronimo, dates back several decades, long before baby Geronimo was, of course, biologically a fact. But the concept of justice, the concept of fighting for justice for the baby angel Geronimo predates his physical appearance on the planet Earth. And as it were, we have been preparing to defend baby angel Geronimo. When he arrives, and the principles of universal justice are simple. They are not complicated to comprehend or understand or access. Let's say, in all these countries with which the UK or England is kind of linked with ethnicity, all these countries and domains, including the country called New Zealand, where baby angel Geronimo was born, the people in those countries have got an ethnic kind of affiliation with the natives, Little Englanders. So people from Australia, from New Zealand, from Canada, the bit that is not French, and most of the United States and significant parts of the Southern African countries, especially South Africa. These people boastfully refer to their identity, ethnic identity and origins. And in effect, what they boast about is the values, collective values and culture. And what do they mean by values? The values, of course, include what the arch-racist, imperialist Thomas Babington Macaulay wrote in his diaries in 1830s about imposing the English language on the subcontinent. Of course, they mean that. And we shall come to that because at least two persons who allege to be supporters for the campaign for saving baby Geronimo actually posted racist idiocies criticizing alleged defects in our language, English, that we couldn't or didn't write proper English in our defense of baby Geronimo. They have no idea how thickly, deeply stupid and racist they are. We have ignored And we are still not naming those because we want to keep the focus on the campaign for justice for baby Janjal, Geronimo. But essentially, the people who have been boasting generally about the Englishness in those territories have been talking on the basis that their sense of values, their values, whatever, were superior to the values of other people. Now, that is obviously absolute idiocy. But in the current context of the behavior of congenital liar Boris Johnson and his cabal of crooks and criminals at DEFRA and in the High Court benches, these boastful references to British values and culture could not come across as more ridiculous. So what on earth is the Murdoch Times doing, running on a front page, the heading that migrants from Afghanistan or Afghan migrants are going to be taught British values and culture? What does DEFRA's conspiracy against Helen Macdonald, the denial against Helen Macdonald, the criminal conspiracy against the angel, baby Geronimo, what does that show about British culture and British values? Well, as an early critic of the English law, an Irish academic called Tom Hayden showed about 50 years ago, company law in England, or English company law, was a tool of capitalism. And that has remained unchanged. And the Lebanese Muslim-born current editor of the Financial Times of London, Rola Khalaf, Muslim-born, remember? She has boasted, when commenting about her kind of role at the Financial Times, she has boasted that the Financial Times under her continues to remain the Bible of capitalism. She doesn't say, Khalaf doesn't say, that the Financial Times is in existence to make the truth about finance and capitalism known to readers and to society. She doesn't say that she's editing a paper in order to make the Financial Times and the collection of outlets that the FT actually controls, the vehicles for auditing the corrupt capitalism, which is destroying the planet. Now, the fact that Khalaf was quoted as saying whatever she said about the FT being the Bible for capitalism, she was talking about this Pegasus project. It's a project that has been developed in Israel for use by various regimes, repressive regimes, to spy on their critics at home and abroad. And the Guardian published the one list of the targets of the Pegasus spying, which list included Rola Khalaf. So that was the context and the reference for which she was being mentioned in the Guardian piece. And instead of saying that the Financial Times is auditing, scrutinizing, and examining the behavior of capitalism, she boasted about capitalism. And she even boasted about the Financial Times being a stooge, an agent, a propagandist for capitalism. In that quote, she didn't even bother to explain any difference between various parts of what she called capitalism. And so therefore, there is no way that she could have foreseen what either Chris Cook wrote on the 30th of August, or what 2 days later the current president of the Law Society of England and Wales, I. Stephanie Boyce, wrote about the serious criminality and illegality and law breaking that has been ongoing in Britain under the frontage of the congenital liar Boris Johnson. So if you look at the treatment by Fleet Street newspapers of the Christian church sexually violating children, you will know that that could not have been taking place without complicity by the media, the Fleet Street papers. Because Fleet Street newspapers don't report, they don't investigate sexual abuse by the church, by the clergy. They may only report when somebody else has done the investigation or something horrible has happened that cannot be kept suppressed anymore. But they don't, as a rule, go out of their way to investigate. Now, if that applies to the prevalence and continuing prevalence of sexual abuse by the Christian church or churches, then the same complicity by silence of the media in fact applies to the corrupt bureaucracy, corrupt racist bureaucracy called the judiciary. Call it English judiciary, call it British judiciary, or call it the judiciary in the UK. Whatever dimension, whatever kind of jurisdiction, whatever description is used, the reality is that Fleet Street is not investigating the behavior of the judges, the behavior of the courts. That is the case that you can also extrapolate, not just extrapolate, but actually repeat about Fleet Street's silence about the denial of crime and the perpetration of crime and criminality under the various English or UK police forces. I mean, the Daily Mail, for example, has been pretending, and it does pretend every day. The Daily Mail has been pretending that it cares about the victims of the wrongs and criminality of the regimes in the London Metropolitan Police. It claims to care. I say that. I don't say that it means to care. It claims to care, to come across as caring. Why? Because when you test the actual extent, the fact and the extent of the commitment to care on the part of the Daily Mail and its so-called group, you find that the Daily Mail is absent. The Daily Mail is absent from engaging with the wrongdoers, either in the police forces or in the government or in the local councils or in the House of Commons or in the House of Peers. Don't call it House of Lords, because there is no such thing as a human being who is Lord. So Fleet Street doesn't investigate breaking of the law by the police, breaking of the law and the complicity in the breaking of the law by the Crown Prosecution Service, Director of Public Prosecutions. Fleet Street doesn't do that by really investigating the corruption and criminality of their members of parliament and members of the House of Peers. In the context of the wanton, deliberate, brazen, intentional, criminally intentional breaking of an English or UK or British Act of Parliament, specific one being the Freedom of Information Act. This act was not brought about by campaigning by the domestic native Little Englanders, so the native so-called not Little Englanders, like the likes of Paul Mason, as we say. Mason is in the running. He's actually doing the rounds, promoting his book about fascism in Britain. And we call him dishonest, and we call him corrupt, and you call him racist. Now, all this time that baby angel Geronimo has been the target of fascist behavior by the UK, DEFRA, and the condoning of the fascist behavior, condoning by Boris Johnson, none of the likes of Paul Mason, the so-called left of center, as they offensively called to describe themselves or are prone to describe themselves. They don't care about the targeting by the fascist state or the targeting by the fascist part of the UK state of the likes of baby angel Geronimo, or their defaming of baby angel Geronimo's mom, Helen. So there are no actual diagnostic, analytical, fact-based, analytical investigation for reaching a just conclusion has been done by any of the judiciary. The exception we make about the Belhaj case is an exception. It's not the norm. And the other thing is that that case, the Belhaj case, is itself an example of the injustice of the Supreme Court system or the court system in this country. Because the pair, the Belhaj and his wife, had been tortured, arrested, tortured, kidnapped by the Americans and completely with the collusion and complicity of the Tony Blair, Blair-fronted regime and its foreign secretary, Jack Straw. They had been tortured, kidnapped, and violated and abused more than 10 years before the Supreme Court judgment was published on the 17th of January 2017. It's a long time. So even when there is a tokenistic kind of admission by the Supreme Court that there was a notional violation of the rights of the citizen, subjected to the criminally conceived series of crimes against the innocent person or persons, it takes too long. So even if Helen MacDonald began her high-profile challenges to the DEFRA criminality, she did start challenging DEFRA criminality by legal means, but not to the level of, if you like, profile that has become known later. So even if she had started, the mentality, the complicity mentality of the British judiciary is so hostile to the seekers of justice that simply by relying on the part or parts of the judiciary, justice could not be, if you like, guaranteed for baby angel Geronimo. That is the general statement, but I'll come to that statement and specify the individual other detailed shortcomings. So because of the imperial kind of history, the criminals who have occupied the posts of state power in Britain have mesmerized. That is the word. I'm using the word mesmerized. They've mesmerized the majority of the people who I call the gullibles. They are indigenous, white ethnicity, white ethnic people, and they have been mesmerized by being treated to the mass brainwashing about empire. It's like the football fans going to, say, a Spanish resort or a German city or whatever, and engaging in absolute mayhem. Because the brainwashing is done to create a sense of kind of superiority. It's the sense of the worst inferiority, really, because it takes away all concepts of judgment, decency, respect for the others, tolerance, and so on. So these little Englanders and the little gullibles convert themselves into beings without any self-respect or sense of tolerance towards others, and they're just, in fact, couriers of the worst social evil or socially, empirically experienced evil. So imagine the DEFRA criminals are addressing overwhelming majority of the onlookers with that kind of mentality, as DEFRA are about to carry out their criminality against any number of innocents. What will these people do? It's very, very certain that they won't stop the criminality and the violence, which is what has happened with the MPs, members of parliament, the entirety of the British media, and the entirety of the so-called opposition MPs and peers. They have behaved, all of them have behaved, and are still behaving as devoid of any ethics, any compassion, any morality, any sense of solidarity, any sense of risking their own greed and their opportunistic positions to protect the innocent from the plot by DEFRA, plot by Boris Johnson, plot by the entire cabinet. Now, this piece in the Scum by the crook Trevor, terrible Kavanagh, praising Boris Johnson that I showed earlier. This piece. This is a piece in a kind of column by the terrible Kavanagh. And that column has a smaller piece underneath it. That one with white letters against blue background. Now that is a piece about Rod Liddell, who has condemned Boris Johnson's plot against baby angel Geronimo. But that is not a sincere piece. It's a joke piece by the criminal, terrible Kavanagh. Now, the majority of the references to the criminality by DEFRA, as carried by the so-called mainstream newspapers and news organizations, has been totally opposite what they would be if even a tiny amount of injustice, as compared to the whole volume of injustice plotted by DEFRA criminals against baby Geronimo could be said to be done by the regime, any country. And the depiction of that country or that regime or those regimes would be very solidly against that country or that regime, or those countries and those regimes, let's say. So the fact that they are silent and they're allowing Boris Johnson to carry out and carry on and carry the plot against the baby angel Geronimo shows that the press, the media, the Fleet Street, the BBC, the Sky News, they're all in the dark, all in darkness and in the dark mode and dark land. It's a very open, brazen darkness. It is dark, but the extent of violations and violence, condoning violence and injustice, is everywhere in the dark, in the darkness. As if the darkness was bad enough. As if the darkness, identifiable as being present in the personality of Boris Johnson himself. This is bad. It doesn't need to be made any worse. Yet it is being made worse. The fact that it is being made worse by Keir Starmer leaves no room for suspecting or doubting that we are, and the society doesn't exist. And it's the evil doers that are in control, both in power and in so-called opposition. What about the Green Party? Can you imagine Green Party? They're dead, spiritually dead, morally dead, ethically dead, the Green Party, as are the so-called Lib Dems. And so far as the presence in the current kind of context of the relationship between Scots and the Westminster Parliament, those Scottish MPs that are still sitting in the palace of so-called Palace of Westminster have behaved as colluders with the criminal agenda of Boris Johnson against the universally, impeccably, morally, ethically, spiritually, and accountably innocent symbol of justice, baby angel Geronimo. So it's not like the depth of the darkness by Boris Johnson is going to be ended by a so-called alternative set of MPs as government. Is not there. So the darkness is complete. As if that darkness was not complete, you look around the so-called not-for-profit organizations that are supposedly in existence, and they are silent. They have been silent. What about the churches? Well, It's injustice, evil. Justin Webley, I call injustice evil. Just slight rearrangement. This complete criminal and racist was able to find time and connections to issue statements against the Muslims of Batley and Spain. And the Muslims of Batley and Spain, in every numerical measurement, an electoral kind of measurement, were very small. And he found time to condemn them. And the supporters of baby angel Geronimo have been in their thousands, not 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 as the Muslim parents objecting against this particular teacher. Well, the people that solidarize with baby angel Geronimo are in their hundreds of thousands, if not millions, across the world. And Justin Evil has been silent about the fact that people are campaigning for justice for baby angel Geronimo. And he has not issued any statement. So, Justin Evil, by his silence, complicity with the plotters against baby angel Geronimo, shows that his darkness is complete. Now, I have not seen, as I say, if anyone sees or has seen anything contrary to what I am stating, there is nothing accessible that I can find at this time that any so-called Muslim clergy person or a Jewish clergy person or even a Buddhist has made any expressly identifiably Buddhist intervention for justice for baby angel Geronimo. And now the lying Boris Johnson, look at this, he says that he believes Taliban have changed. How dare he? He has treated Helen MacDonald and baby angel Geronimo as worse than the Taliban. And there is no end to the examples of deliberate law-breaking and deliberate lying. If he can say that the Taliban have changed, what evidence has he got? What else can he say? The question is, what else can he say about the Taliban when the Taliban have effectively defeated him and the Americans? So we shall be talking about the evidence-based campaign for justice for baby angel Geronimo. And we shall be doing that as part of the ongoing evidence that we must break out of the hold of darkness and evil that controls the country. This is probably about 1.5 hours long. But whatever the length, we shall be continuing in the next part, definitely.